This video is on explicit teaching. It comes out of a lesson planning series for planning explicit teaching, in this case, in your reading and language arts lesson plans. So to get started, there are 3 parts for explicit teaching. To begin with, you want to explain to students why they're learning what it is that you're teaching them. How will this help them as readers, writers, and spellers? The next part of this section of your lesson, which is found in the I do section of your lesson, is to explain the specific information and content that you're teaching. So in this portion, you're going to be using visuals to show or teach the information, such as using anchor charts, videos, or even PowerPoint slides. Finally, the last part of this section is to demonstrate the information by modeling 1 or 2 examples. So all of this, again, happens in the I do section of your lesson plan. So today we're going to take a look at a few examples where people are including these kinds of parts of explicit teaching, so we can really look at what this looks like. So starting with example 1, this student is planning a lesson in which they're teaching about story elements. So in the content here, it says, the story is a fiction story. Do you know what that means? And the student says no. And the candidate says a fiction story means that the story is not real. The author created the story by themselves. Every story has at least 1 character. Do you know what a character is? And then goes on to tell that characters can be humans, animals, or make-believe characters. It also says that the story has a setting. Tells that the setting is where the story takes place. And then also that every story has a problem that the characters are trying to solve. So as we look at this a little bit more in depth, we can see that the lesson planner has done a really excellent job with giving explicit instruction in the content of story elements and plot elements, such as characters, setting, problem, and solution. Here's another example. In this lesson, the student and the candidate are talking about, again, important parts of stories. And the student here tells that the candidate tells the student that we need to be able to focus on what the really important parts are so we can understand more about the story and be able to share or retell the story. And then goes on to give the information. Talks about where the story takes place and the characters and even the problem. So what I want you to see here about this is highlighted up here, it really does give the information where the candidate is telling how this lesson will help them become a better reader. It also has really good instruction and content. And finally, let's look at example 3, where the writer of this lesson plan really combines all of these different 3 elements. It's a little longer. So on this first page, the teacher candidate says, we're going to be focusing on character and character traits. Can you tell me what a character trait is? And the student says, character trait is how a character looks. And the teacher acknowledges the student response, but also sort of gets at there might be more here. So character traits can help to describe character's personality, appearance, and looks, behaviors, and actions. And then asks how the student would describe themselves. And the student says, I'm kind, funny, and cool. And the teacher says, you just listed things to help describe you. When you describe a character, you're selecting words to help us understand who they are. It is important to learn about character traits so that when you read, you can understand a character and who they are, as well as talk about the changes that may occur in the character throughout the text. So in that sentence that I just read, this teacher candidate is giving them the background for why they need to have this information and how it's going to help them be a better reader. So they go on to talk about seeking meaning and understanding and how it deepens their comprehension. They ask, do we just use character traits to describe looks and appearance of a character? It's one way to describe a character, but it's also important to describe the internal or inside characteristics. So here the candidate continues their appearance, but also their inside character as well. And this will allow you to truly understand the character. So let's take a look at this chart that will help us to understand internal and external character traits. So now the teacher candidate has introduced a chart, which is a visual, which will help the student visualize some of this information. So the student says, I noticed that the person on the piece of paper is split in half. One side seems to be talking about the looks of the character, and the other side is talking about them on the inside. And the candidate says, that's correct. On the left side of the chart, it talks about the character traits on the outside. These are the physical traits, and we can see these traits with our eyes. On the right side of the chart, we get to understand what's included when talking about the inside character traits of a character, including thoughts, words, feelings, and actions. And it can also talk about personality traits. So when we analyze and look at a character, we need to address the inside and outside character traits displayed by the character. And the candidate says, I also have a list of commonly used character traits to help us talk about the characters that we're reading about. And goes on to say that they're going to read the story Ninja Red Riding Hood and gives the student a task of thinking about the character traits of the character in the story. And so what we can see here is that the candidate has introduced the idea of a visual with this chart and uses it to teach the concepts of inner versus outer character traits. The candidate also gives examples and models by talking about this list of character traits that can help us talk about characters that we read about. And so it really does encompass all the different aspects here. So just as a reminder, there's these 3 parts to explicit teaching that you should be including with your I do section of the lesson. This is where you impart or give the information to the students with whom you're working.